Hey noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we are looking at the Netflix series Barbarians once again. But today we're not talking about the armor, weapons and historical accuracy like we have done in previous videos. Today we're looking at the Latin spoken by the Romans. If you are new to this channel and you like Romans, knights, samurai, weapons and armor, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Right off the bat, I love the Latin in this TV series. It's excellent. And there are two reasons why it sounds so good. Reason number one, they have specifically chosen classical Latin pronunciation, also known as restored Latin pronunciation, which is basically the sort of pronunciation that the Romans used specifically at this time. Well, from the late Republic all the way up to the 2nd century, so the time of the Principate. That's the sort of pronunciation we would have heard if we had a time machine and could go back in time. Oftentimes we hear people reading, for example, the De Bello Gallico or a lot of other classics written by the Romans in ecclesiastical pronunciation, which is a lot more modern, and therefore it's a mismatch. There's nothing wrong with ecclesiastical pronunciation, of course. I have talked about this in the past. I use it myself sometimes. If you're reading Catholic prayers, it's absolutely fine, but if you're reading the classics, then, and particularly if you're recreating a historical drama like this, then classical pronunciation is what we should find, and I will tell you more about the difference between these two in a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong, there is an awful lot of Latin speakers who are not from Italy, study Latin and pronounce it marvelously. For example, one of these is, look at Scorpio Martianus. He's American, but he pronounces Latin like mwah. But unfortunately, in the movie industry, usually they get people who have a very strong, very thick English accent, sometimes even American accent, but anyway, in general, an Anglophone accent, and you hear things such as lorica segmentata. It's lorica segmentata. Lorica segmentata. So in terms of intonation and vowel quality, if you teach classical pronunciation to an Italian, that's when you get the most authentic sound. Okay, with that out of my system, let's check the first scene in the TV series. Let's hear the centurion speak, and I'll tell you exactly what he says. I'll translate it, we'll examine the pronunciation, I'll tell you how I would pronounce it, maybe a few things I would change. I'll also tell you about a translation error that we find in the subtitles, which is a big deal, and the same mistake has been made by the translator in the movie. So it's actually something that the Roman says something and the guys don't get it because even the translator makes a mistake. So I'll correct that. Let's jump into it.
Caesar sanctae urbis Romae Augustus, novum legatum ad Germaniam misit, senatorem publium quintilium varum.
Okay, so here he's saying Caesar, which is Latin for Caesar, sanctae, holy, urbis, city, Romae, of Rome, Augustus, that's of course the name of the emperor, novum, new, legatum, basically the general of a Roman army, ad, in, Germanium, that's the name of what would be like Germany, that's where the word Germany comes from, it's the name of those territories, that's how the Romans called it, misit, put. So Augustus, the Caesar of the holy city Rome, placed a new general in Germany, senatorem publium quintilium varum, senator, and then the name Publium Quintilium Varum. Okay, already I love the intonation, I love the way he's pronouncing it. It sounds very dignified, very grand. Of course, classical Latin pronunciation will do that. In ecclesiastical pronunciation, for example, you don't say Caesar, you say Caesar. But the thing is that for the Romans, Caesar. As Look in his video points out, in this part, excellently pronounced, the only thing, legatum. So we need the e longer. Its phonemic vowel length is very important in Latin. Caesar sanctae urbis Romae Augustus, novum legatum ad Germaniam misit, senatorem publium quintilium varum. Let's continue.
Futuite, veluiste porro nil tenent.
Okay, for the word futuite, already Luke spoke like 15 minutes about it. For me, I just want to say it would be the F word, but it's an incorrect translation, as he points out, and he actually brings forth a very interesting alternative, which is mehercules, to say geez, basically. So it's an exclamation. You see the people are not understanding after you spoke in Latin, and therefore you say damn. So futuite, no, and then he says beluae, so beasts, iste, these, porro, rather, nil, nothing, tenent, understand. So damn, these beasts don't even understand anything. We could translate. So let's replace futuite with the word suggested by Luke, me Hercules. Belua iste porron il tenent. Now, another thing that I would like to praise Valerio, and I think he did an excellent job, the actor, is the fact that he's switching. Notice, when he speaks to the people, when he's speaking and everyone can hear him, he's speaking in a very dignified way, and his pronunciation is very correct. In fact, he says Romae. He uses the full diphthong, Romae. He doesn't say Rome. But in this part, when he's speaking just to the guy right next to him, the aquilifer, and he says, Belua iste porron il tenent. So he says iste instead of istae, and so he makes it shorter, rustic, less educated Latin, makes sense. He's just speaking to the guy next to him.
Postac, Roma tributa vostra non amplius remisuras.
Okay, so postac is from now on. He chooses not to pronounce the H. Usually in classical Latin, the H is pronounced, particularly if it's at the beginning of words, but in this case, it's absolutely fine not to pronounce it. Postac, I think it's easier to say. And then he says Roma, so Rome, tributa, tribute, so taxes, vostra, yours, non amplius, not anymore, remisurast. We could translate it as renounce. So Rome, from now on, will not continue to renounce to your tributes. I'd like to point out here that the actor was coached, because you see, modern day Romans tend to pronounce Roma as Roma, Roma, with a closed O, not O. And in the ancient period instead, in Roman times when speaking Latin, it is more correct, the way they pronounce it back in the day would be with an open O, longer of course, so Roma, Roma rather than Roma. As a modern day Roman, he would naturally say Roma, but now here he's pronounced it Roma with an open O, and it's great. I mean, big round of applause for him for doing that. And for example, for me as a Sicilian instead, that would be natural, because Sicilians and people from Calabria, so Calabresi, this section of the south of Italy, we have retained very open vowels, whereas the rest of mainland started to close vowels. So anywhere, if whether you're from Naples, you're from Rome, you're from the north, you will always close and say Roma, but in Sicily we say Roma, which is closer to how it is in Latin. So for me, it's natural to say Roma, like the Romans did, but not for him, so big round of applause for him. The next part gets really exciting.
Varus exigit ab omni tribu pretium viceum boum, vel quinquagenum ponderum frumenti centenari.
Okay, so I love this part. I love how strong and authoritative he sounds. He says, Varus, that's of course the name of the general, the senator, exigit, we have a similar word in Italian, esigere, it's to demand in this case, ab omni, to all, tribu, tribes, pretium, it sounds like price, it's basically a tax, vicenum, which means 20, bon, which are cows. It's interesting because he fully pronounces the M, he says boum, and that's a bit too modern Italian. As an Italian, that's how I would naturally pronounce it. I would say boum, but the Latins, the M is fully nasalized, so it needs to be so boum, boum, if you want to sound authentic. Quinquagenum, 50, ponderum, it's like pounds, although it's Roman pound, but it's a unit of measure. Frumenti, wheat, centenari. So basically it's the amount of wheat that he wants every tribe to pay. What I want to underline here, and that's the translation mistake, is that both in the subtitles and the spoken translation from the Germanic translator, they say that the Romans now want 20 cows and wheat, but they don't. The Latin centurion says well, which means or. So you either pay 20 cows or you pay the wheat. He's not asking for both. He's asking one or the other. So to read the whole thing, postac, Roma tributa vostra non amplius remisurast, varus exigit ab omni tribu pretium vicenum boum, vel quinquagenum ponderum frumenti centenari. Ah, I love Latin. Okay, so now the Germanic king complains. Of course, the Roman doesn't have a clue what he's saying, but he says,
Quid?
Quid? Which means what? And here the next should grant him an Oscar.
Diciterum.
He says, dic, say, iterum, again. It's menacing. It's like he's threatening him. Diciterum. So you can imagine it as, say it again. Then the scene finishes with him saying, spatium vobis est tridum. So the space, spatium, vobis, yours, so your space, est is tridum, 3 days. It's interesting that I think he does this. As an Italian, I would do this, but doesn't really matter. Spatium vobis est stridum. So after all, I love the performance, just a couple of problems with phonemic lengthening of vowels, but generally speaking, excellent pronunciation and excellent exposition. Let's move to Varus.
Nunc demum advenisti, fili mi.
Nunc demum advenisti, fili mi. Okay, so nunc means now, demum then, advenisti, you came, you arrived, fili, son, mi, mine. Now then you have arrived, my son, would be the translation. Gaetano Aronica is an excellent actor, and as I say, he's from Sicily, he's from Agrigento, but when he speaks Italian, and I've heard some interviews, when he speaks Italian he has no accent, so when he speaks Italian he doesn't really speak with that Agrigento accent, I'd like to point out. He lives in Rome with his son and he speaks perfect standard Italian. However, I'm sure he knows how to open vowels because that's, as I say, the natural way of speaking of us Sicilians, so I'm sure that for him it was not a problem to switch into open vowels for Latin. But he's also the oldest of all the actors here who had to probably learn how to pronounce classical Latin, and he's having some problems. He fully pronounces the M, demum gratum. It should be demum gratum. For Italians that's a little difficult for us Italians, but one way that I usually teach Italians how to do this, and in general people have a difficult time with the M being pronounced as a vowel rather than as a consonant, is to think of, for example, the Italian words banca, mango. When you say banca, you don't say bannaca. And when you say mango, you don't say mannago. If I were the pronunciation coach in this show, I would have told all Italian actors, pronounce the M like you pronounce the N in banca. But apart from a few pronunciation anachronisms, I have to say that the way the actor puts a lot of feeling, he sounds like a good guy, even though he's supposed to play the villain. Now I'll talk about whether the Romans were evil or not on a separate video, but definitely on this show they are supposed to be evil, and of course Varus is supposed to be the super villain, and I love the contrast. I love the contrast. The fact that he sounds so good and calm, but he's going to murder you the moment you say the wrong thing to him. And again, I listened to the interview and he sounds like a really good guy. He just has, it's natural to him. He's not using his acting skills in this case, he just sounds like a good guy, even when he speaks normally. So I think that was an interesting choice for the sort of contrast. Very calm, and I think it makes sense considering the very high position Varus had. He would have been a very confident man.
In Germaniam optatus hades.
And the stress here also is slightly off. It should be in Germaniam optatus hades. So the occasional stress that is misplaced when the centurion Metellus says age to say act, well, it should be age. The accent should be at the beginning. So there is the occasional mistake with the stress, there is the occasional mistake with the M, but generally speaking the classical pronunciation represented here is the best I've ever heard in a movie, and it's excellent. Big thumbs up. Now let's talk about another thing for a moment. Why do people complain about the pronunciation in the TV series? Because I've heard people saying, oh, the pronunciation is horrible, or the pronunciation is funny, or the pronunciation is strange. Well, first, some people are just ignorant, but there is also another thing. It depends where the person is from, because unfortunately here in Italy, usually in high school, we are only taught ecclesiastical pronunciation. So a lot of Italians are completely oblivious of the fact that the classical pronunciation even existed, and so we are used to hearing things such as centum instead of centum, centum being ecclesiastical, legionis instead of legionis, like it should be, legionis being ecclesiastical, and that's because ecclesiastical pronunciation is strongly influenced by Italian. In fact, some people call it Italianate pronunciation. The V is not varus like you would say in ecclesiastical pronunciation, it's varus, it's a W. Now, as I say, most Italians don't know this, and there is a specific reason. It's because the Vatican is in Italy. And please don't tell me this lie whereby, oh no, the Vatican is its own country, it's not in Italy. It is in Italy, it's geographically in Italy. Literally, when you are in Rome and you're going through the gate to go visit St. Peter's, you can literally bite a panino, a sandwich in Rome, and swallow it in the Vatican. So don't tell me that the Vatican is not in Italy. Geographically, it's in Italy, even if politically Politically, it's not. And the influence of the Vatican is huge, enormous. And that's why ecclesiastical pronunciation, in my opinion, was pushed onto Italians at school. And I think it's wrong. Not that ecclesiastical pronunciation is wrong. I think it's absolutely fine. I mean, at the end of the day, Latin still is one of the official languages of the Holy See. It is spoken, it is used diplomatically, so it's fine, absolutely. You want to read Catholic prayers all day, you want to use ecclesiastical pronunciation, it's absolutely fine. I even teach it on this channel a couple of times. I was teaching people how to read Pater Noster in ecclesiastical pronunciation, but you should teach Italians in high school about our past. You should tell us that ecclesiastical pronunciation is not right when you're reading Roman writers. And at the end of this video, I'm going to read a passage from the De Bello Gallico by Julius Caesar, and I will read it in proper classical pronunciation so that you can hear. Because a lot of my friends from Italy, they probably have never heard it. Most people just heard it read in ecclesiastical pronunciation, which is an anachronism. Both should be taught. Now, this creates a problem because now a lot of Italians despise classical pronunciation because they've never heard it unless they go to university. Of course, at university it is taught, obviously. But a lot of Italians, they go to high school, they learn ecclesiastical, they hear classical, and they think, oh, they don't even know that I is pronounced e. No, in eloquent classical Latin, Romae. Rustic Latin spoken by people who weren't as educated, yes, sure, Rome. And the reason why some people hate the classical Latin is because it's too different from Italian. But here's the thing, we're talking 2,000 years. Obviously it's going to be different from modern Italian. And I want to give a very strong example of this. We're going to fast forward 2,000 years in the future, and the pronunciation of Italian now has changed. And let's imagine that every word that we pronounced in modern Italian with a g sound, like gamba, leg, is now pronounced jamba, because they change g into j. And let's say that every word that we now in modern Italian pronounce with a k sound, like chiesa, church, is then pronounced chiesa with a ch. From our perspective, that sounds absolutely awful and crazy. I mean, everyone knows it's pronounced gamba and chiesa. But for future Italians, who are used to say jamba, if they hear an archaeologist and a linguist working together to reconstruct the way we spoke in 2020, and people say, I think Italians said gamba. If you have a person in the future saying gamba, oh, this sounds awful, it should be jamba. You see how stupid that is? That's what these people are doing when they complain about classical pronunciation. To give you the same example in English, imagine a word like kiss. Go forward 2,000 years, and now people in America and in England say chiss. Archaeologists and linguists find evidence and say, hey, by the way, if we're making a TV series set in 2020, so 2,000 years ago, we should have people say kiss me, not chiss me, because people pronounce it like a K sound. And now imagine people in the comments going nuts, saying, oh, kiss? Oh, that sounds so stupid and awful. It's chiss, come on. That's exactly what these people are doing. I personally find both beautiful. Ecclesiastical pronunciation, classical pronunciation, they're both beautiful. And I'm so glad that they're using classical pronunciation. That's the pronunciation they should be using. Personally, it is also my favorite. I think classical pronunciation has a charm, has power and authority in it that ecclesiastical doesn't have. I think ecclesiastical is more harmonious, probably because of the influence of modern Italian, so it's more mitigated in a way, it's softer, it's nicer, but classical pronunciation is powerful, and it also has a specific rhythm which is perfect for reading poetry of the time. Let's read some De Bello Gallico, but in classical pronunciation. Queset Caesar inquiteriore Gallia in hibernis, ita uti supra demonstravimus. Crebri ad eum rumores ad ferebantur litterisque item labieni certior fiebat. Omnes belgas, quam tertiam esse Gallia e partem dixeramus, contra populu Romanum coniurare obsidesque intercedere. Now let's try and add even one more specific thing that could make it even more authentic, which is the retracted S, which is not natural for me as an Italian, but I'll try to do my best. It's the sort of S that we find in Greek and Spanish, so not S, but sh. So, dixeramus instead of dixeramus. I personally prefer the sound of front S, but let's give it a try because a lot of Latin speakers would have spoken like this at the time. Queset Caesar inquiteriore Gallia in hibernis, ita uti supra demonstravimus, crebri ad eum rumores, ad ferebantur litterisque item labieni certior fiebat omnes belgas. quam tertiam esse Galliae partem dixeramus, contra populu Romanum coniurare obsidesque intercedere. I'd like to hear your opinions in the comments below, and I will see you again on Saturday for my next video. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Salvete!